Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our October edition of our live webinar. This month, we're going to talk about building a technical file in a global market context. And my name is Jean Boudot. I'm a senior consultant for Brandwood Biomedical. We are a consultancy firm involved in regulatory and quality assurance and support a range of manufacturers of medical devices and diagnostic in a global context as well. Just a bit of housekeeping as to how to navigate through this webinar. So this is a representation of how your screen should look like at the moment. On the right-hand side of the screen, you should be able to see a control panel. If you do click on the little arrow on the top right corner, a pop-up window should appear. And as we go along this presentation, you will be able to ask some questions by tapping in this particular field. At the end of this webinar, we will allocate some time to review those questions and answer as much as possible at those questions. If we are running out of time, we will get back to you via email or try to answer those questions as part of a blog. So let's run through the agenda for today in terms of the technical file preparation. So we will start with some basic definitions. So essentially, what's the technical file? Why would we need a technical file at the first place? We will then run into a couple of slides discussing the relationships between the technical file, the DHF and the DMR, which are terms that you may have encountered if you've reviewed some of the regulatory documentation, particularly from the FDA. And then we will look into the relationship between the construction of your technical file through to your regulatory dossiers and submissions in this global context. So first, let's look into some definitions and some of the surrounding concepts. If you've reviewed some of the quality system regulations, and particularly those of the USA, the 21 CFR 820, and the associated guidance documents, you may have come across a number of terms which have been specified, and we thought it would be probably valuable to spend some time to just review what those terms actually mean and how the different dossiers actually relate to each other. So the first concept which is presented in those documents is the design history file. So the design history file is the collection of the documents which provide full description of the design process, including all the key documents and project management records. So that's essentially all of the history of your product development, both for the initial release but also as part of the product lifecycle. The DMR is the other concept here. The DMR is the device master record. This is essentially a snapshot of the current information that is required to produce the product within its current specifications. So that's the collection of documents specifying a device, as well as the processes which are required to manufacture the product. Moving on to the actual technical file, which is the primary topic of this presentation. So European regulation also makes reference to the summary technical file or STED. Those terms can be used interchangeably. So what's a technical file? That's essentially a collection of technical documents that will describe the device, its intended use, contain some information about the risk management process that was followed, such as your risk analysis that have been used as part of your product development cycle, the test data that relates to this device, as well as the clinical evidence. In addition to that, there will be some information about your manufacturing plans, and again, we'll review into some more details at a later stage what the content of that technical file is. The main purpose of the technical file is to demonstrate compliance of the medical device to the regulation. So in putting together this technical file, you will basically collate all the artifacts that are required to provide evidence of compliance to the regulation. So you'll be demonstrating that the product is safe and efficacious, performed as intended, and also is manufactured under the appropriate controls on your manufacturing side of things. So the key is, and you may have seen this diagram before, I think it's been first implemented by Health Canada and reused in the design control guidance by the FDA at a later stage, and it's been in place, for a number of times for quite some time now. Whilst the representation can be fairly high level, the concepts that it describes are common to any type of medical device, and we thought it would be a good start basically to talk through that a little bit. So there are some key elements here. This is essentially a cascading process whereby as part of the design and development, all the user needs will be identified. They will therefore be transferred into some design inputs for the product. The design process will carry out, and as part of this design process, the outputs will be produced for you to therefore release the medical device. Some of those gray boxes that you can see on the screen are of relevance for several things from several perspectives. The first important thing to note here is that a review should be undertaken at every relevant stage of the product development process. The second concept, which is highlighted here, is the difference between verification and validation. The design verification is a confirmation by objective evidence that the design outputs that you've produced as part of the process are meeting the design input requirements, so that essentially you've built the product right. The other concept which is highlighted here is the concept of design validation. And the design validation is really looking at how the medical device that you built meets the primary user needs. So essentially that you've built the right thing. So let's now look into a bit of a breakdown as to what's produced, as part of those different steps, and see how this will then cascade and support the technical file down the line. So the first step is the design inputs. So the design inputs typically are captured into either a product requirement document or several product requirement documents. As part of this documentation, you'll essentially put together all the requirements from the perspective of the marketing requirements, the clinical requirements for the product, and the regulatory requirements for the product. If you intend to market this product in several jurisdictions, it is essential that you would capture the inputs that are relevant for all of the relevant jurisdictions. So that planning phase is actually quite essential to make sure that you keep an eye on what the end objective of the project is, and make sure that all the regulatory requirements for each of the jurisdictions will be met. In terms of the outputs, so the outputs of the design process will include essentially all your product specifications, so all the design drawings, the bill of materials, the product literature that's produced as part of the process, and relevant for the intended use of the product. And all of that documentation, again, will support, your submission. So it's very critical, and I can't reiterate enough on the fact that a cross-functional team really should be involved in this process, and constant involvement of your regulatory partner would be quite essential as part of that. The quality of the outputs that's produced as part of the process will have a significant
impact on the likelihood of approval of your product as part of the regulatory submission as well. So it's important that all of the outputs that will be subsequently, included in the various submission dossiers have been produced from the perspective of the regulator as well. A transversal process is the risk management process. This is an iterative process. It's very important that a preliminary risk analysis be put in place and that this document be viewed as a live document as you progress through the design phase, but also through the product life cycle, once the product has been released, that post-market data are collected, and that this document is constantly reviewed for adequacy in terms of the assumptions that you've made as part of the design, and for assessment whether additional verification would be required. So the risk management file would be essentially developed as part of the DHF implementation. It's important that traceability there, be maintained such that all the impacts to the patient or the users of the product are considered, and relevant mitigations are implemented through the design. So essentially there is a relationship between the risk management file and your input requirements as well. The verification records, so again, that will include a range of data. Depending on the complexity of your product, the depth of that verification record will vary. There will be test data, there will be certificates that you may have obtained either from suppliers, but also from test labs. Raw data will be produced. Typically, this is included into some lab books, which are cross-referred into the higher level verification records. And those verification records, again, are essential to the content of your regulatory submissions. So again, involvement of your regulatory team member is essential as part of the development of those verification records to make sure that the content of your regulatory submissions actually meets the criteria for review by the regulator. Validation records also, obviously. We discussed the validation process earlier in this slide. So the validation in the context of a medical device, will include several things, but the main element there, which is expected as part of that process is the clinical evaluation report. So that clinical evaluation report, the main purpose is basically to demonstrate that there is that the product meets the stipulated intended use, that there is all measures, associated with the current state of the art have been incorporated, within the medical device, that sufficient clinical evidence has been collated and evaluated in the context of the specific design, and also that you've demonstrated as part of the design process that, all the characteristics of the product have met their specifications. So this is an essential document as part of the process here. Another specificity of the DHF is that it will include all your project management records. So again, all the plans which have been produced as part of that process, such as who's going to be involved as part of the process, what artifacts have to be produced as part of the product development process, all your meeting records, the records of design reviews has highlighted on this diagram here, and the approval of the inputs and outputs at all stages. So the DHF will also include all the project management records here. The next step is to transfer the design onto production, and therefore, as part of that process, the DMR will be created. So the DMR, as I mentioned before, is essentially a snapshot of all the information that's required to manufacture the current specification of your product. So That will include the current specifications and only the current specifications, such as the drawings, the current bill of materials, all your production procedures, which will be used on the manufacturing through the manufacturing process, so all the essential SOPs to manufacture the product, your sampling plans, quality control protocols, and templates, and all the explanation on the release criteria and so on and so forth. And when it comes to all equipment and environmental requirements, so obviously all the equipment specifications which are required to maintain the design to its current state, tolerance and special environmental controls as well, will be incorporated into that DMR. Once the product development process is in its completion phase, a data subset will be extracted from there, and from this data subset, the technical file will be put together. So most of the artifacts which end up in the technical file, if the planning of your design and development has been carried out, as per, adequate controls, there should be minimal information that has to be put together for your technical file. So hence why it's important to, again, keep an eye on the product development cycle, involve your regulatory partner through the process, and make sure that the artifacts will meet the requirements of the technical file as well. So the kind of information, and again, we'll review in a later slide, the specific information which has to be included in the technical file, but information that can be directly extracted from this process include the intended uses and technical specifications for the product, some descriptive information about the product as well, validation and verification data, or the one that is mostly relevant to demonstrate compliance with the essential principles and the regulatory requirements for the product, as well as the current process and production documentation that has been put in place as part of that. So in addition to all the information which has been produced as part of the design process, a number of specific regulatory documents or administrative information, technical and administrative information, will need to be put in place to supplement the contents of the technical file. So that will include some high-level details about the manufacturer and the critical suppliers. Declarations of conformity to the relevant regulation have to be made, often with references to the consensus or harmonized standards which have been used to demonstrate conformity with the requirements. A classification statement. So again, as we discussed before, the regulatory plan and requirements should normally be adequately defined upfront of the product development, and so those classification pathways should be determined as early as possible. This is at the end of the process confirmed once there is full definition of the product and all specifications have been produced and all verification details have been implemented. So classification statement, regulatory classification statement in the relevant jurisdiction. Product history. So we've put as examples here prior supply and approvals. I would probably add to that all your assessments, impact assessments for product changes should also be accessible either by way of reference or by direct inclusion in your technical file, so that there is a continuous demonstration of compliance of the product with the regulatory requirements included within your technical file. And obviously, very significant piece of information here, the essential requirement checklist. So if you're looking into the European requirements under the MDD, the essential principles would be collated into some kind of checklist. Under the new MDR, the term have been changed and the requirements are now a bit more specific. They've been renamed as safety and performance requirements, but the process nonetheless remains the same. The essential requirements would be identified, translated into inputs into the design process, and at the end of this process, a checklist would be put together with specific demonstration of how, through the design process, you've met the regulatory requirements. Again, as I briefly mentioned before, the way you demonstrate compliance with the essential requirements can rely on consensus standards or harmonized standards, which have been stipulated as ways of or best ways of complying with the regulatory requirements. Some of which are product specifics and others are more generic and associated with some technical aspects of the product, such as electrical safety or even risk management with 14971. And the end result is the technical file. So once the product development is finalized and you've added the administrative and regulatory information within the file, you should obtain essentially a dossier content which looks like this. There should be a scope, so what device is actually covered by the technical file, a range of administrative information, about the product itself, all those declarations of conformity and classification pathways, regulatory routes which have been selected in the specific market, overview product description. So although some of the DHF design history file artifacts will be directly included within the technical file, having a bit of a summary as to what the main product features are, what kind of labels have been developed as part of the process, and a brief overview of the product description is very useful to provide context as to the kind of evidence that has been put together as part of the process. All your product documentation, so again the labels, so whether that be the labels, so the product markings placed directly onto the product, whether that be stickers or marks which have been graved or placed onto the direct packaging or the shipper label contents, all of that information has to be included in the technical file. The product manuals, so these can include instructions for use. This can include, clinical manual if you've got different types of users and if they're separate from the instructions for use. All of the information that surrounds the product and which is an output of the design process should be included in your technical file. Product history, we've talked about that. So, where the product has been released, what's the current compliance state of the product, but also your history of changes as it relates to the essential requirements. The risk analysis is also a very significant piece of evidence to be included in your technical file, mostly because this is actually the primary justification for the verification program that you followed for the product. So again, as part of the risk management process, since you've identified what type of hazards and risks exist for the product, both for patients and users, the design process would have identified essentially the mitigation which have to be implemented and incorporated as part of the design to reduce those risks as far as possible. So the risk analysis here is one of the primary elements to build an understanding as to the level of evidence that you've collated as part of the process. Essential requirements checklist, we've talked about that before. obviously, this is your primary evidence prior to putting together your declaration of conformity. So you should only sign your declaration of conformity. Obviously, once you've satisfied yourself that all the essential requirements have been met for the specific product. So that's the key regulatory document, to be included in the technical file here. Current product specifications, summary of testing reports and certificates. So as I mentioned before, as part of your design and development process, a number of artifacts will be produced for verification, commensurate with the complexity of your product. If, for example, you've got an electromechanical product that also includes some software, you would have all kind of levels of verification and reports to be produced. It is not required for the technical side to include every single report which has been produced as part of the design and development process, but you should include sufficient information so the complete story is basically captured in the technical file as to how you are meeting the essential requirements there. So, compliance reports with the relevant consensus standards have to be included in there. And the primary verification as it relates to your system risk analysis also should be included in the technical file. And obviously, the clinical evaluation report should be included and maintained within the technical file for currency. So again, it is a regulatory requirement to produce a clinical evaluation report. This is actually one of the items included in your essential requirements checklist. So it will be an expectation that this primary piece of evidence is also included in your technical file. So this is the foundation of safety and efficacy for your product. It is critical to include that in your technical file. And again, depending on the complexity of your manufacturing process and the relevance or level of variations, I should say, which can occur as part of this process in regards to safety of your product, plans and so inspection plans and manufacturing plans also should be included in the technical file. This can be put together in a summary form, or in a more expanded form in the case where some specific stages of your manufacturing process can have a direct impact on the compliance with the essential requirements. One example here is a product which has to be delivered sterile. It would be expected that such a product, include in its technical file more in-depth information on the sterilization process and the controls which are in place on your as part of your manufacturing process. So all of that should be included in the technical file. So now, as an example, we wanted to illustrate the relationship between the DHF, the technical file, and for example, the 510K content. So 510Ks is a process which is associated with essentially class 2 medical devices. For most class 2 medical devices in the USA, there are some specific content requirements which are stipulated in the FDA regulations, but most of the artifacts which are produced as part of your DHF should also be supporting a 510K content should they have been produced in the right way at the first place. So let's look into those contents and how the two relate to each other. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we've listed some of the 510K contents which are more like administrative in nature or specific to the 510K application. Again, consult the current FDA guidelines to make sure that all of the content, meets the latest version of the regulatory guidance documents. But this would include things like, user fee cover sheets, submission cover sheets, cover letters, indication for use statements, some summaries and a whole range of financial disclosures and things like that, should you have included clinical evaluation reports as part of the process. The key here, though, is to show you how the artifacts which have been produced as part of the DHF or product development cycle actually feed into the 510K content. So as you can see, again, in the global context, we've talked about the technical file, we've talked about the artifacts which are produced as part of the process to support the technical file. As you can see, the core information included in the 510K also is extracted from from this process. So all the information about the design description will be presented in a similar format as to what you would have included in your technical file. So this would include, intended uses, the main features of the product, the description of the materials and various components which are incorporated as part of the product, summary of the risk assessment, and some of the main considerations as part of the design. This is somewhat specific to the 510K, item number 12 here, and that's a substantial equivalence discussion. So as part of the 510K process, a substantial equivalence demonstration has to be included. If your design process has been planned adequately and all your regulatory inputs have been determined upfront of your design and development process, that substantial equivalence demonstration should have occurred naturally as part of that process, and there should be limited modifications or amendments to be made at the time of the 510K preparation. So again, the planning phase within your design and development process is absolutely critical, and involvement of your regulatory partner will ensure that all of the contents for the relevant applications, have been considered when the information has been put together at the first place. So make sure that all those strategies are defined up front, so that the format of your DHF essentially supports all of the relevant applications for your product. Information such as sterilization and shelf life also should be included in a 510K. And again, if the product development process has identified all of the risks associated with sterilization, all of that evidence would have been put together, upfront as part of the DHF, and therefore that information should be able to be transferred adequately for your 510K application. Similarly for the biocompatibility information, and when your product does include some software components, the artifacts which are produced as part of the software development process should also be included in, should also have been developed as part of the DHF, and therefore transferred directly into the 510K application with all of the relevant supporting text to explain and essentially make sure that the information presented can be easily understood by a reviewer and the regulator. Don't underestimate the additional information and contextual information that you put together as part of those applications. This is a major success factor into your application. Sometimes we are involved in the design, and we live and breathe with the characteristics of the product. We've been involved in the project for years, possibly, and all of those documents, make sense from the internal perspective. But when you do provide this information to an external reviewer, it can become pretty complicated to understand, and never assume that the reviewer will be a technical expert in your specific area, and make sure that all of your applications are reviewer friendly, and incorporate enough details to ensure the success of this application. And obviously, so all the other sections, 17 to 20, are information about the testing of the product, whether you've used, some bench testing. So again, this is all your verification data that has been produced as part of the DHF. So identify the main hazards and risks which relate to your product, the relevant protocols which have to be put in place, and provide this evidence into the 510K applications in this case. But again, the main aspect here is to highlight the fact that if your DHF has been developed, with the correct input up front, all of those applications should flow naturally. So how, in a bit of a summary form, so how does all of the technical file, 510K dossier, DHF and DMR all fit together? So as I mentioned before, both the technical file, the 510K dossier, or other applications will essentially include some administrative information. These are all contextual information about the product, manufacturers, key vendors, overview of the device and production process. Then there will be some artifacts which are specific to the technical file. So essentially declarations of conformity and classification for the relevant jurisdiction. Conformity assessment certifications when your product did require such a certification. So this refers essentially to certifications provided by third parties. An example here is 60601 electrical safety certification. If you do wish your product to be marketed in a global context, it is essential, or it is recommended rather, that your product be certified by a third party, that the report captures the specific requirements for the various jurisdictions that you want to cover as part of your technical file, and that the country-specific deviations or requirements are also addressed within those reports. Essential requirements checklist here. So that's also a specific artifact which is put together in the context of the technical file. But then the rest, as we discussed before, is essentially, are essentially documents coming directly from your DHF. So all design plans and project records, risk management file, design input requirements, product testing, protocols, and so on and so forth. All of that information should naturally flow directly from your design and development process. So there should be really minimal, if no modification to those documents at the time of actually preparing your technical file. And the other elements within the technical file are essentially your DMR. So again, if the product development process has been followed and adequate planning was in place up front for this process, all of the information should be already prepared. So DMR, that's again all the information which relate to how to produce the product in a snapshot format. All your current production process SOPs and work instructions, which are required to basically put the product together, all your equipment specifications, calibration and maintenance, and so on and so forth. On the other side of the pile, so let's have a look as to how this technical file again, fit into the 510K technical dossier. So the first three boxes here are elements which are specific to the technical dossier, but then the rest is naturally flowing from the DHF. So all your risk analysis summaries are going to be put together from the risk management files, and everything that's to do with the substantial equivalence discussion and indication for use are also coming from the DHF and transcribed into a format which demonstrates substantial equivalence. So all the information included in your substantial equivalence will essentially relate to the information that you've collected as part of the clinical evaluation report, but also as part of all the verification testing that you've put together, through the design and development process. So, in summary, so the technical file is a compilation of technical and regulatory information. The content is drawn from the design history file, but also from the DMR, to which you will add some regulatory and administrative documentation that is specifically produced for that technical file. The main purpose of that technical file, again, is to provide evidence of regulatory compliance with the relevant jurisdiction that's covered by the technical file. And all devices must have a technical file. Careful planning and construction will serve multiple market requirements. So as I mentioned before, the planning phase is absolutely essential. So if as part of your design inputs, you've identified all the relevant requirements for the product as it relates to the various jurisdictions, the design and development process will naturally implement those various requirements. Verification will be put together to demonstrate compliance with those requirements, and you will be able to obtain a technical file and a dossier which meets the various jurisdictions. The technical core is common, and that's because in most cases, first of all, the product specifications might be very similar from a market to another, but also by this statement here, what we mean is that most of the same technical information will be used across the various applications, whether that be for Europe, for Australia, Canada, or US in the case of a 510K. And there will be some local variations on the regulatory documents, which are mostly going to relate to administrative information, but also the way the essential principles will be described might slightly differ, although evidence has to be put together to those various regulations or various jurisdictions. The core principles remain broadly the same. So you would still need to provide evidence of compliance with the relevant jurisdictions as part of your technical file, but if the planning phase was established such that all those requirements are identified up front, you will see a lot of commonalities within those various demonstrations and verification activities. This essentially leads us to the end of this presentation, and as I mentioned before, we will now take some time to answer some of the questions which you may have you may have asked, as part of the presentation. So let's have a quick look through that, and I'll try to answer as much as I can as part of this presentation. Okay, so we have a first question here coming from Rob. Can you explain the term designed to state of art? And what is expected by regulator for evidence that the state of the art has been applied? Okay, so that's an excellent question. Thank you, Rob, for this. So there are several aspects which are considered here. The first one is, as I mentioned before, when you put together the technical file, in order for you to demonstrate compliance with the regulatory requirements, you will use some harmonized standards. So you can identify some harmonized standards, for example, from the European Commission website. a whole range of, there is a list of harmonized standards published in the official journal that you can access there. In the way you demonstrate that the current state of the art has been followed for the product, this first of all relates to the fact that you followed the current version of the standard. The standard is a commonly agreed way of demonstrating compliance with the essential principles, or as they're called now in Europe, safety and performance requirements. If you do follow the latest version of that standard, you're following the latest test method, essentially, to demonstrate compliance with the regulation. The other aspect to this is once you can demonstrate through the technical file that the latest versions of the standards have been put together, another thing that the regulator may look into is whether your clinical evidence is actually up to date, and the body of knowledge that is captured within your technical evidence reflects the current clinical practices. So these are essentially the two elements that you will need to consider when reviewing compliance with the latest state of the art. I hope this answers the question. I'll now move on to another question. So I've got a question from Paul here. If in multiple languages, is there a requirement to include each language translation, especially for the IFU? Okay, so your technical file has to be put together with the view of meeting the local regulatory requirements in the relevant jurisdiction. So all the documentation has to be put in the language of the target country. In Europe specifically, there are some guidance about what languages are actually required and recognized for the specific countries. So there are two aspects there. Sorry. The first aspect is to put together the dossier as it will be required for the relevant regulator. So if, for example, you send an application in Australia to the TGA, your technical dossier, including the instructions for use, have to be in English. Now, in the context of Europe, your notified body will require the information to be presented in English, most likely as well. But at the time of the commercialization, you need to have adequate controls to identify what languages are required in the target country, and what languages you have to provide within that technical file. Have a look through the relevant regulators' websites in the relevant country. There is a whole range of information about this. This also takes into account who the target user will be and the risk that it poses to the user. For example, there are some exemptions in the case where a product is specifically intended to be used for a physician as opposed to an end user that would directly utilize and need to interact with the product. Okay, so I've got another question here from Brett. Should the technical file include the design input document? Typically, no. So the technical file includes essentially all of the outputs. So as I presented before, so the information that's included into the technical file relates to the verification, how the product meets the regulatory requirements, and all of the current DMR information, such as what's required for you to produce or to manufacture or to produce the product. So you just need to include the information that demonstrates that the device meets the essential principles, and that should form the content of your technical file. So rarely would you need to go to the stage of including the design input documents. Right. Yeah. So question from Catherine. So how do you build a technical file for several markets, and what kind of markets can typically be covered by the same technical file? So most of the markets that essentially use the GFTH or IMDRF model can easily be supported by the technical file. But as we saw before, some of the artifacts that are put together as part of that technical file can also support some other applications, such as the 510K process in the US. So the key there is really to make sure that the local requirements from the regulator are captured. So the essential principles, the TGA requirements, are mapped out into some form of checklists, for example. Use these essentially an input to the design process, translate those into some specific design inputs. For example, put together your plans as to what harmonized standards you'll be using, and drive those requirements through the product design and verification stage. Again, make sure that if a standard includes some national deviations, those national deviations have been addressed within the technical file, so that you'll be able to demonstrate compliance with the relevant country that you intend to market your product in. And obviously, the other aspect to that is that you will need to make sure that your clinical evidence contains information that is representative of the local clinical practice. So make sure that if there are different clinical practices, in those various countries, and this is verified and incorporated in the assessment or in the evaluation report, and that you currently represent the body of knowledge for the target jurisdiction. I'd say, as well as all the technical information that's included in there, you will need to draw, depending on the classification of your product, you will need to draw the relevant declaration of conformities, and again, the essential principle checklists demonstration for those various jurisdictions. So the example there is the declaration of conformity for Australia is different from the declaration of conformity for Europe. Both the regulators identify a specific contents for those. Make sure that your technical file comprises the relevant declarations of conformity to support you, the product release in the relevant jurisdiction. Question from Zhang. Do you need to include all test reports in the technical file? You do not. The technical file, again, the primary purpose of the technical file there is to demonstrate compliance with the essential principles. So what that means is that most of the essential principles will relate to the final product, the top level product, so your system. So for example, if your product if you take the case of a complicated product that includes, say, some mechanical components, electrical components, and software components, you would have verification of each of those subsystems, but you will also have a level of verification which occurs at the system level, which is essentially the integration of all those subsystems together. Typically, your technical file will include information about the top level system. Again, the key is to incorporate in the technical file sufficient information so that you can present a compelling story as to how you're meeting the regulatory requirements from the essential principles. So make sure that you include, all the relevant information there so that you've got sufficient coverage within the essential principles. Right, so we've got a number of other questions. I think what we will do is we will endeavor to respond to other questions via email to make sure that you receive the adequate level of support there. So this leads us to the end of our presentation. I hope that you found this content useful and that this is helpful in the context of your device and product development process. Again, if you do have any other questions which have not been asked, as part of which have not been answered as part of this particular forum, make sure be in touch with us. Check our website, Twitter, follow us on LinkedIn, or check up our YouTube channel. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.